All right. Hey, Andre, nice to see you again and be together to talk a little bit about fathering. This is Discipling Dad. And Andre, you're a dad. You have a couple
I
kids.
I have I
Yeah.
have been for the last 8 years at least, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you just keep enjoying every day, and it's
Yeah.
such a privilege to be a dad, and it's such a privilege to be able to talk about being a dad. It's such a practical area we all need help with, and I'm definitely one of them. So I'm
Yeah.
thankful for these Fridays we get to talk.
For sure. I hope Andre's accent sounds a little different to you because he's from South Africa, but I think he's losing it a little since we're talking so much all the time. But he's Afrikaans and I'm American, and yet we're both Christians and we get together. And the purpose of this show is just we want to be more faithful fathers. We want to grow as fathers. And we've talked about a lot of different aspects of fathering already. But last week and this week, we want to talk about helping our children learn to listen. You a pretty good listener naturally, Andre?
I think there's definitely room for improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you think? What do you think keeps you from being a better listener?
I think sometimes it's you're trying to think ahead. And so you're already in your mind, you're thinking about the next step instead of listening to what the person is saying and responding appropriately to what they're saying, because you're already in your mind going a certain way down a certain track,
Yeah.
and so that doesn't and it's not a good thing, but it could be a good thing, but it's not a good thing because then you're
Yeah.
missing out on what someone is really saying, and then you kind of usually say something back that doesn't fit the context.
Yeah. Me, I think I'm impatient. So I'm an impatient listener. I always say I'm in a rush and I don't know why. I'm always in a rush and I don't know why. And that doesn't make for good listening as you're interrupting people or just wanting to get on to the next thing. So I definitely need to grow in listening. And this is something that kind of seems easy at first, but in reality is one of the hardest things to do well. And one reason people think listening is easy is because they confuse hearing and listening. What's the
Mm.
difference? Well, obviously listening requires hearing, but what's the difference between hearing and listening?
Well, I mean, listening will actually require you to not just hear something, but to think and reflect on what you've heard, and then you generate the appropriate response. And a wise person, the Bible would say, takes is someone that thinks about that before he responds. So he doesn't
Yeah,
just speak. So
yeah,
it requires some intentionality to process what you're hearing.
yeah, that's for sure. Listening requires processing. I read a quote this week. It said, hearing is simply the act of perceiving sound by the ear. If you're not hearing impaired, hearing simply happens. Listening, however, is something you consciously choose to do. Listening requires concentration so that your brain processes meaning from words and sentences. Listening leads to learning. And so hearing is easy for most of us. I know some people that have trouble hearing, but listening is difficult. What would you say are some of the fundamental elements of good listening?
Yes. Well, one of the first ones would be paying attention. So that is crucial. If you're not paying attention, then you're going to miss it. And so that's key. You
Yeah.
kind of got to start there. And so I even thought about, an active listener is someone that not only pays attention, but is someone that's able to resist the temptation to want to respond immediately to what's
Mm,
being said. So there's self control involved in the way you listen if you want to listen well.
yeah.
Um, so I
Listening
thought that's helpful.
Well,
Yeah.
that's good. Listening actually requires a bunch of other virtues like self control, like humility. Like I might not
Hmm.
fully understand what they're saying and I need to ask questions. But listening is a choice you make. It requires concentration. It means you want to work at understanding. Usually, if you're listening well, you're able to communicate back what the other person said in a way they would agree with. Like they're like, yeah, that's what I said, and that's what I more than importantly, that's what I meant. Listening requires drawing information out uh, and then understanding that information that you've been given. So there's something active to listening. Listening is not just a
Hmm.
passive thing, and that's difficult. Proof
Hmm.
we got it's difficult proof from our own life. Um, I'll tell you, one way I fail to proactively listen. A lot of times I don't go after information, and that's because of
Mm,
pride.
mm,
You got proof from other people's lives. You meet somebody who's a good listener, it almost feels weird. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but like you're so used to people
definitely.
not listening to you that when somebody
Yes.
actually listens to you, you're like, whoa, what's going on? Why do you care so much?
Yes. And I think it's sometimes both, you get the people that obviously don't listen by, like, you just gave them counsel, and then they immediately do the opposite. So that's just clear. They did not listen. And then you get other guys that they're nodding their head, and they like agreeing sort of, but then they go do the opposite anyway.
Yeah,
And so you think they were listening, but they are not listening at all.
yeah. I guess some people equate listening with being able to be quiet and nod your head for a while. But there's definitely more to listening than just looking like you're listening. I
Mhm.
mean, if we just think about our children, we can see how difficult listening is for them. Why do people have such a hard time listening, though? I mean, this seems like it should
Yeah.
be one of the easiest skills there is, but it's not.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, well, like we said, it's pride. We want to look smart, like we already know things more than we do, and so listening actually requires someone to gain instruction, or another opinion, or another perspective. And so if you think yours is the only way, and then you're not going to want to listen because you kind of made
Mm,
up your mind, and and so you want to look smart, and you think you're smarter than others. Not like you said, impatient. We're just so impatient, so we just like to get things done and move ahead. And so people get frustrated if they have to slow down and now have to take other people's views into consideration, because again, I just want to get stuff done, and because I know, and you can see it from kids to adults. It's all the whole range. and then
mm.
and then usually it ends up with anger, goes along with anger, because you're not getting the things you want to do, and so you become angry about it.
Yeah, listening can make life messy because it slows you down. It may mean that you have to do something different than you originally wanted to do. And so listening is hard because we're selfish and we want to do what we want to do, and we don't want anybody to get in our way. And so here we've got something that's really important: listening. It's also difficult, and it causes a lot of problems when we don't listen. So I mean, not listening is a problem for so many reasons. What are some things that happen when people are not good listeners?
Yeah, I think when they're not good listeners, it usually ends up, you see it in their lifestyle. So foolishness. So even when our Proverbs talks about the wise man listens and the fool doesn't, and you see the consequences in their lives. So a fool usually rushes into things or makes decision without slowing down to listen and make and process. And then because it's so, they don't learn. So you keep making the same mistake over and over.
Mm,
So you keep bumping your toe. So you can tell your kid, watch out for that rock in the road. And then if he doesn't listen, guess what? He's going to knock it on the way up. He's going to knock it on the way down. And we keep doing the same.
yeah. It's hard to learn if you don't listen, and it's hard to love if you don't know how to listen. Listening is loving. I read a great quote. I think it was from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He says, the first service that one owes to others in the fellowship consists in listening to them. Just as love to God begins with listening to his word, so the beginning of love for the brethren is learning to listen to them. It is God's love for us that he not only gives us his word, but also lends us his ear. So it is his work that we do for our brother when we learn to listen to him. So if you want to make an impact as a father, as a human being, you have to learn to listen. And obviously, given how important it is and how hard it is, we can't just sit back on this as fathers. We have to train our children to listen. And last time we started talking a little bit about how. And we
Hmm.
said first we
Yeah,
need to teach them to listen to you.
yeah, crucial. That's number one. Teach your kids how to listen to you, because, I mean, God has put you right there in front of them. and that's a means of grace in their life, for them to have someone that is committed to training them how to listen.
Yeah. This is not about being arrogant. Like, hey, I get to have my own house and this is the one place I get to talk forever and everybody just shouts out, amen, amen. But this is actually about how God designed life to work. So parents are and their instruction are meant to be a blessing to their children. So they need to learn to listen to you. And then you need to teach them how to listen to you. And you probably should do that from a young age. And what's involved in a child listening to you? What are you looking for?
Yes. So we said it last week, and I think this is so helpful for parents to just simplify it. So 4 steps: stop, look, listen, and repeat. So get the
Mm,
child to stop what he's doing and get his attention on what you're saying. Look, have them look you in the eye, and because then they're tracking with you and they're processing. Then they're going to be able to listen to what you have to say, and then they got to repeat it back, and so it's clear, and so you can actually gauge whether they understood what you instructed them to do. So
mm.
those simple steps: stop, look, listen, repeat.
If they can develop that habit at a young age, it's just going to make talking to them at an older age so much easier. And so you
Mm.
almost want that to just become ingrained in them and they can tell when you're talking about something important, that this is just almost instinct for them. Stop, look, listen, and then be able to repeat back what you said. Third, we want to help them not only listen to us, but we want to teach them to listen to truth. And I know this is something you've worked hard at in your home, and we want them to learn to listen to truth privately in family devotions, but also at church. What are some things that stand out about how you tried to teach your children to listen at church?
Yeah. So again, you know, having a plan as a parent first. So let me just say, practically, you don't want to go in there and think that's just going to happen by itself. So even as you come to church, you got to prepare, and so we have to think through stuff like we've had to gone through different stages where we've taken a book, a notepad, we've taken a whiteboard where they can, and we try different things to see what works for them to be able to not get distracted from listening. So whatever you take could be a potential barrier if you don't think it through. So
Uh-huh.
you want to use things that is going to help your kid, put them in the best position possible to focus on what they need to hear in church. So notepad, not 10 different crayons. Maybe choose one, because otherwise they're going to fall over the floor and distract everyone around you. So pick one, and then even have them listen for key words in the sermon, draw a picture of what they see, write down questions of what's not clear, and then be able to engage with your children afterwards, to
Mm.
make sure they are processing what they were hearing.
One of the things we talk about with our younger children is what to listen for, because I've noticed that adults even, but kids don't always know what are they listening for in a sermon. So when they're really young, obviously they're just listening for key words that you told them to listen for. But as they get a little older, especially you can do this in family devotions, is you teach for a little bit for a short period of time, and then you ask them, what did you get from that? And so often a young child is going to get some random piece of information that actually doesn't have anything to do with really to do with what you're saying. And so one of the things we work with our kids is how to figure out the guy's main argument. What is the main thing that he's actually wanting you to hear? And that's something you have to teach. That's not something that just always comes naturally. And so you want to teach your
No,
kids to listen truth.
Yeah, no, I just think also, like, even when we review with our kids, sometimes when we do devotions, and at the end I ask them, okay, so if you had to, we talked a lot today, like in our family devotions, there are a lot of words, like sum it up for me in one sentence. If you could summarize this in one sentence, what do you think we were speaking about today? And then that
Yeah.
helps me to see how much they actually did, were able to put all that together, even though we try to build those steps of listening.
Yeah, that little bit of accountability really helps. If you know, even coming home from church, that your dad's going to ask you a question about the message. After a while, even if you don't get it, you're going to start listening for something to say, especially if your dad encourages you and challenges you as to the importance. A good question to ask your kids, even coming home from church, is how are you going to change as a result of that message? Or what was convicting to you personally? Or so So they learn not just to give you abstract information like pride is bad, but
mm,
uh, I am proud sometimes, and I am proud this way, and this is how I need to fight against pride. But that it doesn't always come out when they're 4 years old. You got to keep
mm,
working it, and then give them a little give them an
yeah.
example of how you're going to change what you got from the message. What was you can
Yeah,
also sometimes what was difficult to understand. All these kinds of questions.
yeah, I was thinking exactly that now is because sometimes we want to be that dad who wants to ask the questions, all the stuff, and then you can't move forward until they tell you something, or it's kind of you can get a little tough. But so just lead them through examples. Say, hey, this is how the message impacted me, and then many times the kids like relate. Like, oh yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I thought too, or that's right, and then they come up with their own examples of we should push our children. They learn more than you think,
Yeah,
and they listen sometimes more than you think. So it's good to push them a little bit and not just accept the yeah, Jesus is the answer to everything. No, no, it was about Jesus.
yeah,
There's a lot more to it, and they are processing. Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of an art because you want to be push them, but be reasonable. And so, the reality is you probably aren't sitting listening to a 50-minute message without breathing. Like you are. I'm sure there's little wiggles that you do during 50 minutes, and you don't at every second of that preacher's message aren't listening with the same level of intensity. So you can't expect a 6-year-old to be able to do what you can't do. So there needs to be some being reasonable with your children, but at the same time, you can expect more than a lot of parents expect. They can get a
Mm.
lot more. Even a young child can get a lot more from a message than you might at first assume they can.
Yeah, the
So
encouragement also goes such a long way. Even this last Sunday, I mean, we got home from church and, going through all the work of my son, writing notes and he's showing me all his pictures, and just that I could see how much he lights up when we were able to, like, because we really worked hard at getting him to sit still this Sunday, and he did a great job. He did it. And so we were like, oh, just giving him the appropriate praise for that. And that was just fuel for him to want to keep going and learning and doing it well. And so,
yeah,
we should use those moments. Use it.
uh,
It's a moment.
and even by encouraging them, you're teaching them what is valuable in life. So a lot of
Yeah.
parents get real excited when they shoot a basket or make a score in cricket, and you should get more excited about them listening to the word of God than them doing well in sports for sure. And by doing that, you're teaching them this is actually what really is significant.
Yeah. So good.
We want to help them know how to listen to truth. We also need to teach our kids who not to listen to. And we said, I think last week, that's really big in Proverbs. But what we're talking about is being discerning. And we
Mm,
do that as they're growing up. They're babies. We say, don't put this in your mouth. Put this in your mouth. And you need to do that spiritually. Don't put this in your ear. Put this in your ear.
mm.
They have to be able to spot lies because it's constantly. There's just so many uh, foolish voices that are talking to our children all the time. And so, how do you teach your child to be discerning?
Mm. Yeah, I think you got to fill their minds with truth. So if they're going to be able to make a distinction between what is false and what is true, the truth needs to be in there. They need a different reference point, something to compare with. Otherwise, it's all just one dimensional in that sense. So you got to fill their minds with scripture and with truth. The Bible's so full of those instructions, and so that's key to be able to do that.
Yeah, I love how John Piper puts it. He talks about helping your congregation, but we say our kids develop a nose that can smell the bad stuff. Like you can a theological sniffer. He calls it. This food's rotten, and so one way you do that is by just filling their mind with truth, so that they may not know completely what's wrong with what's being said, but they can smell something's off with this milk they're trying to feed me. Something's not quite right here. Another way is
Mm,
just role play. So we do this, especially with our children growing up as they were going to school. Is we'd go through the book of Proverbs, and I would create sort of conversations. And what if somebody says this to you, and I'd say it in a little kid way, and then they would have to tell me, how do you respond, or what's wrong with what they're saying, or what's actually true. And so those role plays, you're just trying to get them to to be able to spot when somebody's taking them down the wrong path.
Yeah, and it's such a practical way and actually a fun way to get your kids excited about the Bible because you're showing them that these things are so practical and so helpful, and you actually set them up to recognize that when they're going to go into a certain situation, they actually have to think because they're going to have to make some choices. It's not just let's just go in and be. It's
Yeah.
going to require thinking, and so you're helping them by setting them up by giving him that role play and showing the different scenarios of what this could look like. And we do it with I mean, think about it. Kids at a young age, when they're getting close to the oven, you show them, oh, if you touch this, it's going to burn, right? It's going to be hot. It's going to burn. And so you take that same kind of attitude, and you want to teach your kids if you're going to be exposed to X, Y, and Z, it's going to impact you. So you've got to be able to stop and warn them in that sense.
Mm. So we have some special needs children, and what I hadn't always realized was just the difficulties they have mentally processing information. And so one of the things I've had to learn as a parent and failed at, but had to learn, is that it's harder sometimes for them just mentally to be able to spot when someone's telling them a lie. And so I've actually had to think, how do I teach these children, because they're going to be lied to, and yet their mind is a little bit slower. And so two things that have helped is, one, God's given them a conscience. And so even if their mind is not as quick, they do have a conscience that can give a smoke alarm. And so what we try to do is teach them to really listen to their conscience and what to do when their conscience is, and we're trying to fill their conscience with truth all the time. And then the second thing we've had to do with them is actually just train them a little more directively to come to trust mom and dad, and come to us and be open, and we have to keep pursuing them so that we can help them process the information. Others, as they grow older, they're able to process it better on their own, and so there can be a lot more of that. But with these special needs children, we've had to just keep them a little closer to us so that for their own safety, and hopefully over time they're going to begin to learn, but it's a little bit of a slower process to teach them to be discerning. Finally, real
Yeah.
quick, we want to teach our kids to listen to others and not just dominate conversation. One of the
Yeah.
things
So I mean,
yeah, I
no,
go
no,
for
go,
it.
no, go for it. No,
Ah,
I
now
was
we're
just
both
saying.
try it. We're both listening.
No, I was just thinking there's such great power in listening to someone. So if you want to, like you were saying earlier, like you can make a real impact. It's really powerful if you can be a good listener. And
Yeah,
so you can actually help your kids make a real impact by being a
yeah.
good listener.
One of the funny things about being an encouraging dad or mom is that your kids can sort of get a diluted view of the world. And what I mean is they think they're more interesting than they are because you're always excited about what they're saying and you just love them so much. And so one of the funny things that you have to find a way to graciously teach your children is that the world's not your mom, and that you're talking about Barbies for 30 hours to some old guy is not necessarily going to be just loving that conversation. And so it's a funny thing to figure out how to graciously teach your children that. But I guess what you're trying to get at is a self awareness and a love
Mm.
for people, that they're actually uh, concerned about how the other person is responding without developing a fear of man either. So we need the
Mm.
Spirit's help in teaching.
Yeah, I've just seen so I've been impacted by other guys like you and others, and the example of asking good questions. So I think even like if I go to a conference, and I'm meeting new people, and I mean, I love asking questions now and just listening to people talk. I don't like talking about myself, and when people ask me about me and all that sort of stuff. So it's nice for me to flip that and have an intentional approach of like I really want to get to know this person, so it's going to require me to ask good questions and then listen to what they say, and I want to teach that to my kids,
Oh,
and because I think that'll help them so much.
if you teach your children to ask good questions, they are going to be so rare, and they're going to learn so much. I mean, we've been living in Africa for 12 years, 13 years. And it's always amazing to me when I'll go somewhere where they haven't been to Africa, you know, and yet to get beyond how are you uh, is very difficult. Like the people they can't come up with questions to ask, and I'm like, all I'm saying is this is an easy one. You've never been to Africa. There must be something that is interesting that you'd want to know about Africa, and so it just reminds me of how rare a skill this is, asking questions.
Mm,
Because even when it's
mm,
easy, people have a difficult time coming up with a question, and so certainly you want to teach your kids that through your own personal example, through helping them learn to be curious, and then helping them see this as a way of loving people. And so, as fathers, we want to help our children learn to listen to us, the truth, to others. And how do we do that? Practice, instruction, training. But finally, let me add, this is a opportunity to get to your children's heart, because real listening takes humility, and it also takes a willingness to change and grow. And so, one reason kids don't listen well is just they're kids and they need to learn how to listen. But another reason kids don't listen well is the same reason we don't listen well, and that's because they're proud and they want to know it all, and they want people to think they know it all, or they think they know more than they do, or
mm.
because they just uh, self-willed. They don't want to obey God, and so they don't want extra information that might force them to change. And so, not only do we need to teach our kids the skill of listening, we need to be skillful at shepherding their hearts and getting to what's really the root of poor listening. Is it just that they're being childish? Is it that they're being self-centered, though? Is it that they're being proud? Is it that they just want to sin? And so we need to apply the gospel in those kinds of
Yeah,
situations.
I mean, the Bible puts his finger right on it. So Proverbs, there's two Proverbs that come to mind here. I like the King James on the one version. It says, "Only by pride cometh contention, but with well advised is wisdom." So that
Mm,
pride is the problem. And then in Proverbs 12:15, it says, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice."
mm.
So how many times do we see that in our kids where they are wise in their own eyes? So you're trying to instruct them or teach them, but they are so confident that they got this and they know what they're doing, even though it's pretty evident they don't.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be such a hindrance to moving forward.
Mm. And how often are they imitating us when they're like that? Let's pray that we give
Uh,
them an example of gospel humility and listen ourselves. Thanks, Andre. Appreciate getting together with you, talking about listening, and looking forward to doing that some more next week.
yeah, let's keep listening this week and work on it ourselves.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.